Greytown is no more. The 1854 razing of a Central American port, the U.S. business is behind its demise, and the lasting foreign policy legacy. Slideshow based on the book by Will Soper, published by McFarland and Company Incorporated. Of Jefferson, North Carolina. Best viewed in full screen mode. On 11 July 1854, the U.S. Navy sloop of war, Cyane, arrived in Greytown on the Atlantic or Mosquito Coast of Central America. On this 1850 map, Greytown, usually one word, not two, is also noted as S. Juan, because it was called San Juan del Norte until 1848, when the British seized it from Nicaragua. It was also called San Juan de Nicaragua. The name Point Arenas refers to Punta Arenas, that crooked arm of land opposite S. Juan. This sandy point formed Greytown Harbor. The day after Cyane arrived, George N. Hollins, United States Navy, the captain of the Cyane, sent Marines into the tiny port village where they confiscated 3 small cannons and posted notices. The notices informed the 500 inhabitants of Greytown that they owed the Accessory Transit Company, the local U.S.-owned but Nicaragua-incorporated steamboat company, $24,000 in reparations for damages done to its property by the town residents. The damage accusations were contrived pretexts, thoroughly debunked in my book, but beyond the scope of this video. The townsfolk were also told they must make an apology to an American diplomat, Solon Borland, for an insult the town inflicted upon him about 2 months earlier. The $24,000 Hollins was demanding of the Greytowners was the equivalent in today's money of $640,000, and he gave them just 24 hours to come up with it. If the money and the apology were not forthcoming by that deadline, he would commence firing at the town until it was totally destroyed. The 500 residents did not have such money. As for the apology, it too was not forthcoming. There was no city government in place at the time to give it. The entire city council having resigned over the incident which led to the insult in the first place, about which more later. The 500 Greytowners spent Hollins's 24-hour deadline period setting up shelters in nearby woods. His demands unmet, Hollins started at 9 a.m. the next day, 13 July 1854, firing a cannonade into the town that eventually totaled 177 rounds of solid shot and explosive shells. Little damage was done because the buildings were so flimsy, the projectiles just holed through and through, including the explosive shells, which had timed, not contact, fuses, and just blew up behind the buildings they neatly pierced. Consequently, Hollins ceased firing and sent Marines ashore to burn down everything that still stood standing. When word reached New York, the Herald ran this on 26 July 1854. In the article, they call the Accessory Transit Company the Nicaragua Transit Company, a common error. The proximate cause of the bombardment and destruction of San Juan it is said, was the refusal on the part of the town to comply with certain demands made on behalf of the Nicaragua Transit Company, amounting to $20,000, and a neglect or refusal to apologize for an insult given some time since to Honorable Solon Borland, our late minister in Central America. Assuming this statement to be true, and that the demand made upon the town was just, yet, even then, the public, we think, will agree with us in the opinion that the refusal of San Juan to comply with their demands afforded no adequate justification for the punishment inflicted upon the place. Then, a day later, the Herald ran this: "The belligerent propensities of our present administration could not have been more strikingly illustrated than in the bombardment and burning, by its order, of the inoffensive and defenseless village of Greytown in San Juan de Nicaragua. Such an act of ignorance, stupidity, and badly appropriated moral courage has scarcely its parallel even in the lawless military operations of the Spanish-American republics against each other." This list appeared in the Congressional Record on 23 June 1969 during a debate on the Vietnam War. It was entitled "Instances of Use of U.S. Armed Forces Abroad 1798 to 1945. The list is continually updated with new interventions. The latest iteration was issued in June of 2023. The historical events, like Greytown, have always been just carried forward. The one for Greytown reads, 1854, San Juan del Norte, Greytown, was destroyed to avenge an insult to the American minister to Nicaragua. This has been the official explanation of the razing from day one until the present. It has always been generally, but not universally, accepted. Some newspapers, like the New York Tribune, offered an alternative explanation, a conspiracy of twin intrigues. The chief instigation to this disgraceful act proceeded, as it seems, from the transit company. The active managers of that company have long desired to get rid of the town, which, having jurisdiction over the region about, was a hindrance to their supremacy and had defied their power. It also stood in the way of a great project for the establishment of a colony on the Mosquito Coast, which is entertained by several speculators, and for which they have a grant whose validity the English government has once or twice refused to recognize. The town being removed, it is supposed that project may be carried out with greater facility. Although they parted ways later, the transit company and the land speculators were in league at this time. The general counsel of the transit company, J.L. White, was a director of the speculators company. And here is how U.S. historian William O. Scroggs explained the razing in his classic 1916 book, Filibusters and Financiers. It was to the interest of that corporation, the Accessory Transit Company, that Greytown be wiped off the map, and it had succeeded in inveigling the government into doing this bit of dirty work. It was rumored, too, that the transit company was maturing a scheme to rebuild Greytown for its own profit. Quote, "Few works, in fact, have improved upon William O. Scroggs' Filibusters and Financiers, 1916, unquote." Ralph Lee Woodward, Emeritus Professor of History, Tulane University, 2005. The rumor that the transit company was scheming to rebuild Greytown for its own profit may have been fueled by a letter sent just before the razing to the only U.S. diplomat in Greytown, commercial agent Joseph W. Fabens, from J.L. White, the transit company's chief counsel. Why Greytown was destroyed. A letter written by Mr. Joseph L. White to Mr. Fabens. Dear Sir, Captain Hollins leaves here next Monday. You will see from his instructions that much discretion is given to you, and it is to be hoped that it will not be so exercised as to show any mercy to the town or people. If the scoundrels are soundly punished, we can take possession and build it up as a business place, put in our own officers, transfer the jurisdiction, and you know the rest. While my book might be considered revisionist, it takes the same tack as the New York Tribune in 1854, the Pittsburgh Gazette in 1855, and the historian Scroggs in 1916. It also explores, quote, the lasting foreign policy legacy, unquote, of the incident, namely, the influence of a case law called Durand v. Hollins. Calvin Durand, a wealthy New Yorker whose considerable property holdings at Greytown were destroyed, sued Captain Hollins. This is from the Poughkeepsie Journal of 2 September 1854. Captain George N. Hollins of the U.S. sloop of war Cyane was arrested in New York on the 24th at the suit of Calvin Durand of that city for property destroyed by said Hollins at Greytown. The amount of bail demanded was given and the captain was discharged. This suit brings up a new question respecting the right to destroy property in time of peace, and we trust something will grow out of it to satisfy the guilty that they can be reached and called to account. Durand lost the case, as the captain's actions were upheld in the circuit court case decided in 1860. This precedent is still used to the present day to sanction U.S. military interventions undertaken without the congressional approval required by the Constitution. But before exploring this or any other aspect of this event further, some geopolitical scene setting is necessary, hence the following map. This is an 1850 map of Central America with overlays by me. The red line snaking between Honduras and Nicaragua is their modern-day border. But back in the 1850s, everything to the right of that dotted vertical line constituted Great Britain's Mosquito Protectorate, established to protect the Mosquito Indians, Britain's allies and trading partners in the area. Nominally, a succession of Indian kings ran the protectorate, but the British were really in charge. The English did allow the Mosquito Kings some autonomy, however, including the power to sell huge tracts of protectorate land to whites. Two such land grants are pictured here. About the blue one, more later. The green one figures prominently in the book, but is beyond the scope of this video. The U.S. had never recognized the protectorate or the various kings' land grant sales. American officials insisted Western Hemisphere Indians had no sovereign right to the land they occupied and so could not sell it to individuals. This concept was universally accepted by the white masters of the hemisphere, including the British. But they insisted it did not apply to the Mosquito Indians because the Spanish never conquered them. This bottom portion of the previous map shows the crucial transit route, which runs first along the San Juan River. Then it links up with Lake Nicaragua, which reaches within 12 miles of the Pacific coast. Beginning in 1851, the Accessory Transit Company's steamboats plied these waters, with their river steamers on the San Juan River and their much larger lake steamers on Lake Nicaragua. To cover the 12 miles from Lake Nicaragua to the Pacific coast, a macadamized road was built. This was a hotel on that road. The road ended at Greytown's sister city on the Pacific, a port called San Juan del Sur. Ocean-going U.S.-owned steamships like this one, the SS Star of the West, would rendezvous on both coasts with the little inland steamboats to carry the passengers to and from San Francisco and New York. This cut 10,000 miles and 3 or 4 months from the traditional route around South America. This was a godsend during the early days of the gold rush and for California development generally. This logistically and strategically important shortcut soon had English, European, and American entrepreneurs flocking to Greytown, hoping to sell goods and services to the influx of in-transit passengers. The Accessory Transit Company had all its facilities on Punta Arenas, across the harbor from Greytown proper. This soon caused what Harper's New Monthly magazine called a mortal feud to develop between these merchants in Greytown and the Accessory Transit Company. This was because the transit company also kept all their passengers on Punta Arenas, denying Greytown's merchants their hoped-for customer base. But because Greytown actually owned Punta Arenas and only leased it to the company, they tried to access this customer base by ordering the transit company to vacate and move into Greytown. The company ignored the order, and Washington strong-armed the town into backing down. Before the steamboats, the basic mode of transportation on the river and the lake was the bungo, a large barge-like canoe that still plied those waters, mostly in native trade. On 16 May 1854, an American steamboat captain named T.T. Smith deliberately rammed a bungo and then shot and killed its black pilot, Antonio Palladino, with whom he had often argued. Smith's steamboat, called the Routh, R-O-U-T-H, had been heading towards Greytown with a load of passengers, mostly from San Francisco, but one started his journey on the west coast of Nicaragua. He was Solon Borland, the U.S. minister to Nicaragua, the same U.S. diplomat mentioned earlier as the victim of an insult that will loom large in this narrative. Before this posting, he had been a U.S. Senator from Arkansas. A reporter for the Charleston Courier described Borland as destitute of a particle of discretion, is something of a braggart, fulfills his destiny in eternally getting into rows, and has made a botchwork of every official act of his life. The murder of the Black River pilot by the American steamboat captain, which Borland witnessed, and some passengers later said he encouraged, would soon lead to the confrontation in which Borland was insulted. This, the insult that the official U.S. explanation of Greytown's destruction said was avenged by the razing. Ironically, by the time the insult took place, Borland was no longer a U.S. diplomat. He had resigned from the post in a fit of pique, effective 16 days earlier, after Secretary of State William Marcy had reprimanded him for unacceptable behavior in his post. His duties done, he was on the Routh, headed for Punta Arenas and an ocean steamer to take him back to the U.S. When the Routh arrived at Punta Arenas, Greytown's marshals tried to arrest its captain, T.T. Smith, for the murder of Palladino. Borland prevented this by leveling a rifle at the marshals. He said they had no authority to arrest an American, which was untrue. The residents had declared Greytown an independent city-state in 1852, and there were 2 Anglo-American agreements recognizing the new government's right to, quote, punish wrongdoers, unquote. This image is from U.S. Naval Proceedings magazine in 1918. Quote, Daniel Webster, as Secretary of State, had, however, declared to see that all reasonable municipal and other regulations in force there were respected by the vessels and citizens of the United States resorting thither, unquote. After the marshals backed down, Borland went into Greytown to see the previously mentioned U.S. commercial agent, Joseph W. Fabens. An angry mob followed the chief marshal there to confront Borland for preventing the murderer's arrest. Just as Greytown's mayor arrived, hoping to defuse the situation, someone threw part of a broken bottle at Borland, slightly scratching his cheek. This, finally, is the insult the official U.S. history is referring to when it says Greytown was destroyed to avenge an insult to the American minister to Nicaragua. Borland left for New York the next day on the U.S. ocean steamer Northern Light, but not before persuading 50 fellow Americans to remain behind, arming those who were otherwise unarmed. For a monthly stipend, they were to protect the transit company until, as Borland testified later, Washington sent, quote, a proper force for this purpose, unquote. In response to Borland usurping the town's authority in the Palladino murder, and then leaving an armed ersatz constabulary in their town, the entire city council, as noted earlier, resigned. After the razing, the New York Tribune revisited Borland's actions at Greytown and the city council's response. Mr. Marcy also makes a point against the authorities of San Juan that they had not punished those who insulted Mr. Borland. But if they could not be allowed to exercise the most necessary functions, even the arrest of murderers, without the permission of the extraordinary envoys of the American government, or if they were to have an armed force raised against them on their own soil by such a fellow as this Borland, why, clearly they were superfluous and could properly do nothing but abandon all nominal power and responsibility. This they did the next day. Immediately after the assault on Borland, both he and Fabens reported to Secretary of State Marcy on the event and gave their recommendations on how Washington should respond. Regarding his opinion of the Greytown residents, Borland told Marcy, quote, I am unable to regard them in any other light than as pirates and outlaws, upon whom punishment to the extent of extermination may be rightfully inflicted, unquote. And commercial agent Fabens told Marcy, Quote, with regard to the losses suffered by the Accessory Transit Company, I am of an opinion that no suitable indemnity can be obtained from the parties now in possession of affairs except by taking possession of and holding the territory of Mosquito, so called, beneath whose flag the outrages in question were perpetrated, unquote. Greytown had been an independent city-state for 2 years by this time, and was no longer under the flag of the Mosquito Protectorate. As the next 7 slides suggest, both Borland and Fabens may have had ulterior financial motives for taking these positions. This appeared in the New York Tribune about 6 weeks after the razing. There is good reason to believe that it was for the purpose of producing a decided rupture with the town that Mr. Fabens was sent here as commercial agent. It can be shown that he was chosen and recommended by the leading men of the transit company in New York, who promised him all their influence and support. And then, about 6 months after the razing, it was announced that Fabens had joined the speculators that the New York Tribune reported wanted to establish an American colony in the Mosquito Protectorate. This was on a land grant they owned called the Shepherd, which was about the size of the state of Maine and included Greytown. Fabens became the right-hand man of the colonization scheme's leader. As for Borland, there was this revelation in the New York Tribune of 29 August 1854. It accuses him and J.L. White, among others, of conspiring with the Nicaragua Transit Company, aka the Accessory Transit Company, to destroy Greytown. Soon after Solon Borland returned here, Washington, there was a select dinner party got up to discuss and settle the question of the Nicaragua Transit Company's interests and titles to these Shepherd Grant lands, at which Solon Borland and Joseph L. White were present. At this dinner party, the bombardment and destruction of Greytown was resolved upon. The day after its, quote, dinner party, unquote, piece on the previous slide, the Tribune accused Borland of trying, many months earlier, to negotiate for a 1/8 share of the Shepherd grant. When Mr. Borland was at San Juan de Nicaragua, he went to visit old Captain Shepherd, the person holding the repudiated grant of the entire Mosquito Coast, which Great Britain has 2 or 3 times refused to recognize. Borland proposed to Shepherd to put through his claim on sharing. In other words, if Shepherd would give him 1/8 of the right to the territory, he, Borland, would undertake to have the grant confirmed and Shepherd put in possession. This the old man declined doing, on the ground that he had already sold out to Mr. J. L. White and others. Occasionally, the British would repudiate or annul an Indian land grant sale. In this case, moving forward, all parties, including the British, acted like the Shepherd was valid. And then there was this. Another paper, the Semi-Weekly Courier and New York Inquirer of 2 September 1854, accused Borland of offering his services to the Shepherd Grant Company at about the same time he resigned his diplomatic post. The statements in some of the public prints relative to Borland's interest in the Central American Land and Mining Company, which is destined to convert the Mosquito Country into a dependency of this union, are incorrect. About the time that this man forwarded the resignation of his mission to the president, he made offers of service to the company in consideration of a heavy interest in their property. This was held under advisement for some time, and would probably have been accepted but for the proceedings of the ex-minister at Greytown and the subsequent bombardment of the place. It was contemplated to dispatch Mr. B to Greytown and place him in general charge of the company's interest. That design has been abandoned. In addition to these two newspaper articles, this next slide presents a passage from a private letter that also indicates Borland's interest in the Central American Land and Mining Company and its shepherd grant. Henry A. Wise, a prominent Virginia Democrat, sent this letter to his friend and fellow Virginian George Booker, who was a part owner of the Shepherd Mosquito Indian Land Grant. Booker had asked Wise for advice about his investment. As noted, Wise seems here to implicate Borland in the scheme. Quote, "I can't bear mosquitoes," unquote, wrote Wise, going for a play on words. Quote, "I am the worst speculator in the world, but I will see to your interest cheerfully and give you my advice. It is needless, I know, to say to you not to go too deep in such matters. Borland is an honest enthusiast." As if seconding this thought, the New York Tribune offered the following snippet about 2 months later. Quote, "It is supposed Borland also holds a lot of unaccessible stock in the Central American Land and Mining Company, and that this fact contributed to render him rampant at San Juan, aka Greytown." Close quote. As noted earlier, the Greytown razing spawned a legal precedent, Durand v. Hollins, which is still used to the present day to sanction U.S. military interventions undertaken without congressional approval. Google the case name, and you'll get about 6,000 hits, including an abundance of references to its past uses, debated legitimacy, and still current viability as a foreign policy tool. In 1987, for instance, Fred Manget, a legal counsel for the CIA, wrote in a paper called Presidential War Powers, "The President also has the power to order military intervention in foreign countries to protect American citizens and property without prior congressional approval. This theory has been cited to justify about 200 instances of use of force abroad in the last 200 years. The theory was given legal sanction in a case arising from the bombardment of a Nicaraguan port by order of the President in 1854, in retaliation for an attack on an American consul." The image of Manget is unrelated to his Presidential War Powers paper. And in 2019, Columbia Law School professor Matthew Waxman wrote in Lawfare, a blog dedicated to national security issues, published by the Lawfare Institute in cooperation with the Brookings Institution, "Remembering the Bombardment of Greytown" by Matthew Waxman, July 13th, 2019. Quote, "If the United States launches limited strikes against Iran, I will not be surprised if the Justice Department cites this case in its justification." Unquote. Waxman previously served in senior policy positions at the State Department, Defense Department, and National Security Council. The well-documented contention of this video, reflective of my book, is that the official U.S. explanation of why Greytown was destroyed is incorrect. Hopefully, my book will result in this official account being corrected. And if it is, should it not follow that Duran v. Hollins, based as it is on a gross misapprehension of events, be called into question as a legal precedent? The Congressional Research Service, Congress's think tank since 1914, is the keeper of the official interventions list, updating it every year. The latest iteration was issued just in time to make this video. As always, the Greytown entry says the port was destroyed, quote, to avenge an insult to the American minister to Nicaragua, close quote. In the 7th edition of their book, National Security Law, Stephen Dicus, William C. Banks, Peter Ravenhansen, and Stephen I. Vladeck raised my very question about Durand, referencing an op-ed I wrote in 2018. One observer believes that the real motivation for the attack on Greytown was not protection of American property, but removal of the town itself as an obstacle to the business of U.S. investors. See Will Soper. Can an amateur historian rewrite history? History News Network, October 23, 2018. If true, would that alter the value of Duran v. Hollins as a precedent? There is much more to this story. Of the book's 20 chapters, only 6 figure prominently in this video. There is, for instance, a chapter on the greatest fraud, literally, in history. Similar to the land grant scheme here, they both were subjects in yet another chapter detailing the drafting of an Anglo-American treaty with intrigues worthy of Machiavelli's Prince. There is also a courtroom scene chapter with histrionics right out of a Hollywood movie, and another one on how the Mormons got involved in this story. If you want to see all this and more, including a brief mention of Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky, you'll just have to buy the book, Amazon link in description, or borrow it from a library. Will Soper.